All right, well, welcome to this class here this afternoon on the writings of Ellen White. Our first topic together is going to be a brief introduction to Ellen White as a human being. Who was she as a human person? As I've mentioned, she's been dead already for 90 years as of 2006. And so we are beginning to forget and to lose a little bit of the anecdotes regarding the life of Ellen White itself. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is very briefly give you a survey, a little summary of a biography of Ellen White. Who was she? What kind of individual was she? What kind of a human being was she? So before we begin, let's pray together. Dear Lord, as we pause here this afternoon, as we begin also this class, I pray that your Spirit will guide us. I pray that your Spirit will be present. Not only that our own self may be enlightened and learn new things about Ellen White, but also that, Lord, we may be conscious of how you guided her and through her that you guided your church. We pray, Lord, that your Spirit will be here to enlighten our minds, to open them up, and to help us understand. In Jesus' name, amen. Ellen White, the human person. Her father, Robert Harmon, was a hat maker for most of his life, lived in Portland, Maine, so in northeastern United States, in the state of Maine. Her mother, Eunice Gould Harmon, notice that Ellen White, her middle name, Ellen White's middle name, Ellen G. White, is Gould. It is her mother's maiden name. So this is where she gets her name from. Father and mother were very close to Ellen White, she was close to them also. She loved her parents. And she also had a large family. Her family consisted of a number of brothers and sisters. Her oldest sister, by the name of Caroline, married a Methodist clergyman, Chloe. We know a little more about Caroline through her niece, or Ellen White's niece, Mary Chloe. Mary was employed by Ellen White as a literary assistant for some years. And why did Ellen White hire somebody who was not an Adventist? Well, one of the reasons is that Ellen White wanted, through Mary, to try to get some kind of light to Caroline. So Ellen White employed Mary as her literary assistant for a while. Another family member is Harriet. We don't know much about Harriet McCann, wife of a clergyman who lived in Kansas. We know about John Harmon, a businessman in Illinois. So very briefly, these people are members of Ellen White's family, but the details are brief regarding who they were. Mary Harmon Foss is one of the better known of Ellen White's siblings. She married Hazen Foss's brother, Samuel Foss. You remember that in your history, Adventist history, that before Ellen White had her first visions, two other individuals in New England received very similar visions. One of them is by the name of Samuel Foss. Now, Samuel had a brother, Hazen. He married Ellen White's sister, Mary. The sister of Ellen White that we know best is Sarah Harmon Belden. Sarah married Stephen Belden in August of 1851. And the two of them were very close to Ellen White, lived in Battle Creek for a while with the Whites. We know them also through their children, Franklin and Lillian. Franklin Belden, you remember, is the songwriter. A number of our hymns in our hymnal are from Stephen Belden, hymn writer, composer, and so we know him a little bit more. Franklin Belden and Ellen White's son, Edson, the oldest surviving of her son, Edson, and Franklin were good friends. They were about the same age, were good friends in Battle Creek. But they tended to get themselves into trouble, the two of them together. Ellen White had a lot of difficult words to speak to Franklin Belden. Franklin being a little bit of a renegade, in his own ways. She tried to bring him back to the church when he left after some years. She wanted to bring him back. She wanted to encourage him to be sincere in his life with the Lord. And at one point, she wrote him a letter. And in her letter, she said to Franklin, I hope that you will not be, on the day of the judgment, that you will not be like one of Noah's carpenters. Now that's quite an image, isn't it? One of Noah's carpenters. Meaning by this that Noah didn't build the ark all by himself. There were some other people who helped him, but they were not saved in the ark. They participated in the work of salvation, but they themselves were not in the ark. But she used that expression to talk about Franklin Belden. Robert Harmon is the second brother of Ellen White. He is the only brother of Ellen White to become a Sabbatarian Adventist. He died young in 1853. Sarah, the slide before, and Robert are the only two siblings of Ellen White who became Seventh-day Adventists. They are the only two of the family. Ellen White had a twin sister. That's usually not very well known. A fraternal twin. They were not identical. Elizabeth, or called also Lizzie Harmon Bangs. They were fraternal twins. Lizzie never accepted Ellen White's gift of prophecy. That's interesting. You know, twins usually are very close to each other. Among all the siblings in the family, twins are very close. And here it is. Ellen White's own twin sister never really accepted her ministry. Lizzie always lived in Maine, and Ellen White visited with her later in years, just before she died, but this response was never there. I wonder how Ellen White felt about this. Only two of her siblings accept the Adventist message, and her own twin does not. So I'm trying to understand the human personality here, the human feelings in the person in Ellen White, because she was a human being after all, just like we are. So that is Ellen White's family. The question sometimes is asked, how about all the talk and the discussions that have been given or discussed regarding Ellen White's African ancestry? You've heard about this? Yes, sir. There have been a lot of discussion, a lot of talk, even books written about Ellen White's African ancestry. What do we say? What do we think about this? That's a very good question. It's a complicated question. At least to find the answer to it is complicated. Here is the best that I have been able to find out and to know. The Ellen White estate has done some research, some genealogical research into Ellen White's ancestry. Now this goes back to a number of years, and a number of research has been done. Lately, within the last 10 years, there is a retired pastor, conference president by the name of Elder Dudley, who produced or published a book on Ellen White's African ancestry. And in it, he claims that Ellen White, on the Gould side, could go back to some African Americans in the eastern United States. Now that has raised a lot of questions, and people have wanted to know, is this accurate? Is this possible? To the best of our knowledge so far. And a lot of people have studied this and tried to find some answers. To the best of our knowledge so far, we do not have tangible proofs of this. There is we can perhaps try to connect some missing links, but to have some direct connecting links, some official documents that would prove this connection, those do not exist. Does that matter? Really, no. It does not matter. But for some people, it's important to know, to find out a little bit more about ancestry and connections and links. Like anybody else, I like genealogy, and I have dug up my genealogy and have gone back, 10 or so, 15 generations in the past, been able to find some things. So for me, it's neat to be able to find some things. And so for some people, particularly African Americans, it is an important point of subject. Has there been some kind of a conspiracy of silence regarding Ellen White's African heritage? I wish to say no, I don't think there has been a conspiracy of silence. But what is happening is that tangibly the documents don't seem to be there to be able to connect these points. So what we hope is that maybe one day, documents will surface, that we will have some connecting links, and we will be able to say that. So in the meantime, that's all we know. That's all we know. And like any genealogical research is, sometimes it's difficult to do some genealogical research. I may want to add that when Elder Dudley's book came out, the White Estate decided that we needed to do another research into this. To take Dr. Dudley's research material, all of his files and everything, go through them, and have somebody who's an expert in genealogy do the research. So we hired a Mormon genealogical research specialist to do this. The Mormons are good at genealogies. And we asked him, or was it a her, I'm not sure, to do this research and to come with their opinion. And to the best of their opinion, also of their analysis of the research, there is no real proof of that yet. So that's all we know for now. You had a question?
So where did the idea come from?
Well, if I could show a better picture of Ellen White, let's go back to the very first picture of Ellen White. You don't mind? Let's go back to the very first picture I put on the screen, this one here. Here's where it comes from. Ellen White's nose and facial features tend to look like African American. The nose ridge is broader than usual, than for a Caucasian. Could that be the result of her accident? Because she received that stone in the middle of her face, right around here. It broke her face, broke her nose. Could that be the result of that? You know that in those years, in Ellen White's time, there were no cosmetic remaking of facial features and so on. Could that be the case? That's possible. But African Americans will say, she looks African. She's got looks of an African. Well, that would help too. And well, the photos are not the best, and the pictures are not the greatest, and so that's all part of the discussion. So all I can say is that there is a lot of discussion, and not sure we can have a clear answer to those yet. Maybe you will find something one day that will help do this. Okay, I don't know much else to say, so I don't know how many more questions I want to take, but I'll take two more. Yes?
Then how do they know if it was or
Same thing. As far as the genealogical research so far shows, there is no link in Ellen White's ancestry to anything else but Caucasian ancestry. As far as we can tell, it's only Caucasian from European descent. English, European. Yes? Say it loud.
If you don't mind me answering the question that was posed earlier, does it really matter? And I think there's a subconscious value to the African American culture and black culture of a Christianity that seems to at its basis have been European.
Yeah.
It does matter.
Yeah.
Just like it does matter the pictures that we often see of Jesus that are not accurate as to the description of the Bible in which we believe in.
Yeah.
There is a value there, and I think that the value needs to be understood that in commonality or in common culture doesn't seem of major importance, but there's a subconscious value and encouragement and confidence
Very good.
that one can gain from understanding if she was black per se or not.
That's right. That's basically it. It's a subconscious value to this. It will not deter anything from her gift. I hope it does not. But it's a subconscious understanding that would be nice to find out, and it would be nice. That's all we want to say. Let's move on. One event of the life of Ellen White that I've already mentioned briefly is the fact that Ellen White, at the age of 9, suffered a very tragic accident when a schoolmate of hers who was chasing Ellen White and a group of friends picked up a stone, a fairly large one it seems, and threw it toward the group, toward Ellen White. And at the moment when Ellen White turned around to see how far the bully was behind her, that's when she was hit between the eyes, right about here, and in the face, with a fairly large stone. That stone broke her face, broke her nose, and she was for 3 weeks in a coma. She lost a lot of blood because of that accident. Now we go back here to 1933 or 36 thereabout. 1836, excuse me. 1836. Ellen White is 9 years old. Now you know the state of medical advance in 1836. And if somebody has that bad of a concussion and that bad of an accident, a facial accident, and in coma for 3 weeks, you know how primitive medical care was in those years. Ellen White did not receive any medical care. She was put in some kind of a cradle in her home, and for 3 weeks she was nursed. No intravenous fluid being given back to her here. For 3 weeks she did not drink, she did not eat, and she suffered from a very heavy loss of blood. Can you imagine how she looked after 3 weeks? She said that she was reduced almost to a skeleton, while a 9-year-old girl is not already that big to start with. And so she was really affected by this. She called it her misfortune. It was to affect, she said, the rest of her whole life, that misfortune. Ellen White was so physically disfigured for the rest of her life. An anecdote is told to us that when her father came back from a trip, he had been gone on a business trip when the accident occurred. When he came back, walked into the house and greeted the children, and he turned to his wife and he said, "Where's Ellen?" Well, Ellen had been there all along, but the father thought she was a friend, a neighborhood friend, who had been in the house when he arrived. Wow! How would you feel? How did she feel when her own father did not recognize her when he came back from this trip? Ellen White was deeply affected by this accident. She felt that her facial features had been so marred or affected by this that she did not look pretty anymore. So I'm getting here, by reading in between the lines, feelings of low self-esteem on the part of Ellen White because of the way she looked. And you know how young ladies are, 9 years old, teenagers, they want to look nice. Why not? Everybody is like this. And Ellen White's feeling were, I don't look nice. My face has been broken and so on. Here's what she says in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 2. Every feature of my face seemed changed. The sight was more than I could bear when she looked at herself in the mirror. The bone of my nose proved to be broken. The idea of carrying my misfortune through life was insupportable. I could see no pleasure in my life. I did not wish to live, and I dared not die, for I was not prepared. You see the feelings that she felt? Let's experience, or at least understand a little more, the human person of Ellen White. How she grew up as a teenager with this misfortune of hers. The aftermath of the accident was that she never resumed formal schooling. She tried to go back to school. It lasted a couple weeks, and then she went back home. She could not go back to school. She has altogether a grade 3 education. Some 50 years after the accident, she wrote that which for a time seemed so bitter, that's the accident, and was so hard to bear, have proved to be a blessing in disguise. The cruel blow which blighted the joys of earth was the means of turning my eyes to heaven. She's turning things around a little bit here. I might never have known Jesus had not the sorrow that clouded my early years led me to seek comfort in Him. So she learned a good lesson out of this very bad accident for her. Ellen White is the wife of James White. James White is approximately, James White is approximately 6 years older than Ellen White, born in August of 1821, also from eastern United States in Palmyra, New York. He is the fifth of 9 children, so the middle child. He also suffered, like Ellen White, from very poor health. In particular for him was his eyesight. That kept him out of school until the age of 19. Well, here we have an adolescent, a young man, who really begins formal schooling at the age of 19. This is a different world, isn't it? This is not the world we know. His formal education altogether consisted of how many weeks? 29 weeks. Well, that's 1 year. That's 2 semesters. Altogether, his whole education, formal education, is 1 school year altogether. So let's imagine here the lives that these people had 200 years ago. He was baptized into the Christian Connection denomination, which is a primitivist or Anabaptist descent type of denomination, restorationist denomination. I meant to say. He was profoundly moved by the preaching of William Miller in September of 1842. He met William Miller, listened to him. Thereafter, he became a quite successful Millerite preacher, and then finally was ordained to the gospel ministry in his denomination in April of 1843. So he is a minister early in his life. James White and Ellen White met prior to 1844 in Portland, Maine, but that was just an occasional type of meeting. They really became acquainted on a trip to Orrington, Maine, which is in the eastern part of the state, where they both went to combat fanaticism in early Adventism. They were on a journey together to meet some of the early Advent believers in that part of the state, and that's how they got to know each other a little more during that trip. Ellen White was not alone. She had her sister go along with her and also some other friends. Slowly, courtship developed between the two, but was allowed to mature only after both of them had assured themselves that their relationship was approved by God. They really wanted God to approve that relationship. And when they did finally sense that approval of God, they went ahead and got married. The ceremony was performed by a justice of the peace in Portland, Maine in August of 1846. Why a justice of the peace? Aren't they both Christian believers, faithful Christians? Why go to a justice of the peace? Because they did not have a church. Neither one of them was member of a church. They had no real congregations. So they were married by a justice of the peace. We still have the marriage certificate. It's in the White Estate office in Silver Spring, Maryland. At the time, James White was 25 years old. Ellen White was on her way to become 19. She was 18. So about 6-7 years apart from each other. Ellen White always had a problem with timidity. We don't get that sense, do we? Adventist lore and anecdotes give us the impression that Ellen White was this woman that was so strong and mighty that she could stand up, against anybody and just was not afraid to talk and to wag the finger and not at all. Ellen White was timid for most of her life. And why is that? Why was she so timid? Well, there are a few reasons. The first one is a residual effect of the accident. Low self-esteem. She doesn't look nice. She's conscious of that. And so therefore that makes her timid, not wanting to be forceful or expose herself. At the age of 17, she was commissioned to public ministry by God, but that did not mean that all of a sudden she becomes, extrovert and sanguine and able to stand in front of people and talk. That took a long, long time. Her reaction to God's calling was that I was exceedingly troubled, she said. My heart shrank in terror from the thought. Terror. The reasons, basically poor health. She's only 17. She's frail. She's young. She's timid. Well, sometimes maybe we can relate to that, can't we? Some of us were there too. Ellen White suffered also in her own personal life from acute privation in her home. The earliest days of their married life, they lived with other people. First with the Harmon family, and then with the Stockbridge Holland family. They did not have a home of their own. They lived with other people for the first few years. When they started to do housekeeping on their own, they borrowed furniture. They didn't buy it. They borrowed it. And then slowly they became financially independent. But that took some time. They were poor people, very poor people in their early years together as a married life. In vision, Ellen White was shown some years later that the Lord had been trying us for our good in these early years and to prepare us to labor for others, that He had been stirring up our nest lest we should settle down at ease. Our work was to labor for souls. If we had been prospered with means, home would have been so pleasant that we would be unwilling to leave it. Trials had been permitted to come upon us to prepare us for the still greater conflicts that we would meet in our travels. Isn't that an interesting understanding of life? They were poor for a reason, she says. And the reason was to prepare them for the hardship of pastoral prophetic ministry. So let's look upon that for ourselves too, to some extent. There's good points there. James White, as we have already mentioned, was not always healthy. In his early years, he was a sick young man, but later on, he became very sick. As far as we know, James White had a few strokes in his life, and the first one was in August of 1865. He had a very bad stroke, paralyzed and so on. He was hospitalized in Dansville, New York, at the institution called Our Home on the Hillside. They stayed there from the late summer of 1865 till a few days before Christmas of that year, tried to receive some health care, some health reform. But God instructed Ellen White to remove her husband from that institution, that was not the best place for him to be. On Christmas Day 1865, on their way back home to Battle Creek, Ellen White received a vision during a prayer session in which she was shown that Adventists had not done enough to promote health, and that they should establish a health institution for two reasons: to promote proper cures for healing those already ill, like sanitariums, but also to teach prevention of illness through proper diet and other reforms. James White never totally recovered from this stroke that he had. He would experience 5 others altogether before his death 16 years later in 1881. But for these years, for this period of 16 years, Ellen White was not only a mother, a wife, a prophet, a pastor to some extent, but she was also a nurse. She nursed her husband for all these years. She cared for him when he had these strokes and could not work and could not do anything for himself. So she was a nurse, very, very close to him, and took care of his needs. David?
Do we know what the cause of the stroke was?
Oh, very likely overwork and overstressed. These people did not take vacations. They did not take days off. They worked, 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, weeks on end, and on and on. And with the stress of pastoral ministry, of James White being the General Conference president for many of these years, that meant a lot of stress. A lot of stress. And that's likely what killed him, all of that stress. And that's why he likely had these strokes also. There's an anecdote that is told of Ellen White, and that helps us to understand her human personality a little more. To hasten his recovery, they sold their home in Battle Creek. That's the first time he had a stroke there in 1865. They sold their home in Battle Creek and they relocated on a small farm purchased at Greenville, Michigan, a little north of Battle Creek. James White was very reluctant to engage into any kind of physical exercise, physical work. But Ellen White had been told that to help him recover from his stroke, the best thing would be is to do physical labor, to do physical things. Not mental things, but physical. And so she thought that if they relocated on a small farm and that they did farm work together, she included, then that would help him recover. Well, he didn't want to do that because he had been thoroughly converted by Dr. Jackson's philosophy of health, which is if you're sick, you don't do anything. You sit down, you lay down, you play games, you play cards, but you do whatever you want. But you don't do anything physical. And Ellen White said, no, that's not the way to recover from sickness. It's to do some physical activity. And so they moved there. And in the spring and summer of 1867, slowly he began to recover his health. But what's interesting is that that summer, Ellen White knew that her husband's ways of thinking were so that he would not help with any of the chores around the house on the farm. And so she went around and she talked to all the neighbors. And she said to them, when my husband comes to see you, when it's time to cut the hay, tell him or find some excuse so that you cannot come and help. Well, you know how farmers are. Farmers are very much helping each other when the harvest comes, when the hay time comes. And so she went to see all the neighbors and told them, say no. Find an excuse. You can't help. Why not? Because I want him to do it. I want him to get out there and get some physical exercise. It will be good for him. Well, so when it came time to do the hay, James White went to see the neighbors. He could at least walk to do that. And they all said no. Well, he was upset. He was really upset. But Ellen White told him, let's do it together. The children, you and I, we'll be able to do this. You ride the wagon. You sit on the wagon, direct the horses and so on. We'll pitch the hay into the wagon. We'll do it. But you go ahead and you help us. And it worked. It worked. It recovered. But that tells us a little bit about Ellen White. She's a real person. She knows that her husband's got to do something physical. And he doesn't want to do it. Well, we'll find a way. We'll find a way for him to do it. He experienced some other strokes. I've mentioned that already. Something that really affected Ellen White is the fact that the Battle Creek Church rejected her and her husband. It's hard to understand. Perhaps it's because they were too close to each other. All the neighbors were Adventists in that part of Battle Creek. They all worked together. They all attended the same church. They were all on the same committees and so on. So after a while of this very close proximity of the prophet with the church members, the Battle Creek church members really began to say that they had had enough of James and Ellen White. Didn't want to listen to them, didn't want to pay attention to them, spread all kinds of rumors and gossips about them, and they basically rejected them. That really happened right after James White got sick the first time while they were in Greenville in that general period of time. That was a very difficult time for Ellen White in these 1860s, that decade, when the Battle Creek members, very discouraging to her and to others. Here she says in Testimonies, Volume 1, grieved in spirit beyond measure. Now imagine, grieved in spirit. I remained at home, dreading to go anywhere among the church for fear of being wounded. Now the timidity here comes through a little bit. Finally, as no one made an effort to relieve my feelings, I felt it to be my duty to call together a number of experienced brethren and sisters and meet the false reports which were circulating in regard to us. Weighed down and depressed, even to anguish, I met the charges against me. Now you get the feelings here? Weighed down, depressed, anguished, grieved in spirit, wounded, and so on. Right? She's having a heavy load on her shoulders here, mentally, intellectually speaking. It's affecting her very own self. Isn't she a real human being? Isn't she? She is. One thing that has surfaced also through reading the writings of Ellen White and her letters is that the relationship between her and her husband was not always the most positive relationship. I suppose like any marriage, like any husband and wife relationship that goes through ups and downs, their relationship also went through ups and downs. Likely because James White became very cranky with the years because of being overstressed, overworked, demanding, workaholic, and sick also because of his strokes. His strokes likely affected his temperament, his character. Likely because of all these factors. And Ellen White perhaps too on her side. She was overworked and stressed and tired and accused and so on. The relationship between the two of them became strained, particularly in the late 60s and 70s, to the point where at times it was better for them to go in different directions. Now they never separated, of course they never divorced, but in some summers James White would go east for the camp meetings, she would go west. The other summer they would exchange, and he would go one way and she would go the other. They had difficulties. How would you feel if you're the prophet of the Lord and you live in the same house with the General Conference president? And you've got kids together, and you don't agree as to how to handle one of them. Edson was a difficult child, renegade, spendthrift, spent all of his money very easily, was always in debt. His mother always wanted to support him and help him and encourage him and be nice, and James White wanted the tough love. Tough love, man. You got yourself into this trouble, you get yourself out of it. Well, Ellen White didn't want to have anything to do with that approach with Edson. And so the two of them did not see eye to eye on how to raise Edson. And so on. All kinds of family issues, just like any normal family. And so their marriage became strained. Did they stop loving each other? No, not at all. No, not at all. There was still love between the two of them, very deep love. It's just that they had difficulties being in the same room together sometimes. That happens. But I want to say this to highlight the fact that it's a real home. It's a real human being here. So's James and so's Ellen. They are real human beings. It happens. And it happened in their homes too, just like any other homes. Problems were caused for all kinds of situations in their lives. Here's an example in a letter that they exchanged to each other in 1876. Look at the tone of this letter. I shall use the old head God gave me until He reveals that I am wrong. Your head won't fit on my shoulders. Keep it where it belongs, and I will try to honor God by using my own. I shall be glad to hear from you, but don't waste your precious time and strength in lecturing me on matters of mere opinion. That is James White saying that to his wife. This is James White speaking to his wife. Wow, he was upset, wasn't he? He was really, really upset. Well, what I don't have here on the screen is the follow-up letters. I don't have the follow-up letters. You can read them. It's in 1876. The follow-up letters, they apologize to each other and they profusely say they love each other. Please, I'm sorry for what I said, and so on. So they're real people.
Were they at different locations?
Yes, they were. Yeah, they were. Yeah. I don't want to say this here. I'm not showing this example to make fun of Ellen White. I want to show her human personality. And it's a real home here. When James White died at the age of 60 in August of 1881, they had been married for 35 years. That's a long time. That's a very, very long time. And Ellen White went into a depression after he died. This is not talked about often, but she felt so bad about his death, about losing him, her companion of 35 years, that life for her was not worth living anymore. And that year after he died was a year of depression for Ellen White. Very, very low year for her. She said regarding James, his sympathy and prayers and tears, I have missed so much, so very much. No one can understand this as myself, but my work has to be done. I'm going to plod along, I miss Father more and more, she said to her children. Especially do I feel his loss while here in the mountains. That's written about a month after James White dies. I find it a very different thing being in the mountains with in the mountains with my husband and in the mountains without him. I am fully of the opinion that my life was so entwined and interwoven with my husband's that it is about impossible for me to be of any great account without him. You can feel the depressed feelings here. That's about a month after he died. Remarriage? Maybe. Did you know that while they were in Australia, Ellen White that is, in the 1890s, a good friend of Ellen White came to see her and proposed to her? Stephen Haskell proposed to Ellen White in Australia. He was a widower, she was a widow, and they had known each other for decades. They were good friends, and they always remained good friends, by the way. And that he proposed to her, but she said no. And here's why. Since 21 years ago, when I was deprived of my husband by death, I have not had the slightest idea of ever remarrying. Why? Not because God forbade it. No, but to stand alone was best for me, that no one should suffer with me in carrying forward my work entrusted to me of God. And no one should have a right to influence me in any way in reference to my responsibility and my work in bearing my testimony of encouragement and reproof. So she felt that God wanted her. It would be better for her to remain single after she was a widow. But that's interesting. Little tidbits of anecdotes here in her life. She was the mother of 4 sons, 4 children. The first one, Henry Nichols White, died at the age of 16 of pneumonia. Spent many of his early years in the Stockbridge Holland home, while Ellen and James were on trips visiting groups of Sabbath keepers. A good singer, we're told, a sweet singer, at the age of 16. Now imagine, in 1863, they lose their son, their oldest one. He's 16 years old. Some of us have children. And can we bear the thought of losing a child that is 16 years old? That is tough. The second son is James Edson White. He will survive his mother until 1928. He is known by his middle name, Edson, to differentiate him from his father, James. He is a very well-known missionary to African Americans, former slaves in the southern United States, often at a very great danger to himself because of the violence that came from the white owners or angry plantation owners in the South. Edson went to the South to start mission work among the African Americans by teaching them to read and then teaching them the Bible. And for the Caucasian, the white plantation owners, that was a no-no. You don't teach these black folks how to read because that's freedom, in other words. So he had death threats against him and a lot of dangers sometimes, but he plodded along. And his mother encouraged him, and his mother castigated the church for not supporting him enough. So very encouraging here. He was known in his early years as a little bit of a rebel. Again, PK, preacher's kid, but prophet's kid too. He's a double PK. And so that really affected him. But when he converted, came back to the Lord, came back to the church, he was a mighty missionary for the church and for Christ. The third son is William Clarence White, known as Willie White. He became his mother's right hand after James died. He became the one that really supported her, helped her. He became basically the business manager of Ellen White's enterprises, of publishing books, of staff and helping and so on. He became the manager of her household after James White died. A task that Ellen White knew God had called him to do. Ellen White had a dream after James died, in which God showed her what would be the destiny of her 2 sons. And one of them was that Willie would become her support, her right hand would become the one that would sustain her in her ministry. So that was beautiful and encouragement to her. So here are an old photo of James White and Ellen White with Edson and Willie. here in this photo, the first son is already dead. Henry is dead. The fourth son is John Herbert White. He died at the age of 2.5 months old. So again, a mother who loses in 1860 a baby, and then 3 years later a teenager. So let's just think about the feelings that she may have had to go through. So here's the human person, a short biography portrait of Ellen White. She had her own struggles, her weaknesses, her strengths, her difficulty. She battled disease and illnesses. She lived in poverty for some years. She worked hard at raising a family and serving the church. She had her shortcomings. She suffered the loss of her husband and 2 sons before she herself died at the age of 87. That's Ellen White, a real human being. I think that were she to live with us today, she could relate to a lot of the things that we go through also. And we could relate to a lot of the things she went through too, if being a little more aware of them. That's an introduction lecture to help us in our class, to give us a little bit of a context as to who she is. Well, we've got a couple minutes to take some questions. Yes?
I'd like to know, somewhere along the way, I thought I learned that Ellen White came from the Methodist Church.
That is true.
What is that?
That is true. Ellen White was raised as a Methodist in her early years, before she became a Sabbatarian Adventist, because before she learned of the William Miller's Advent message. She was raised a Methodist in New England, in Maine. Yes, that's true. Yes.
The reason for her not attending school was because she was so frail.
She was so sick and so frail. Yeah. Yes?
I've heard some people say, or read, typical critics, they say all kinds of things, but that her injury, when she was hit by the rock in the coma, that could have had an effect on her,
Epilepsy,
and stuff.
give her epilepsy seizures.
As far as you comment on that.
Well, maybe it could. It's true that any one of us receiving such a blow to the head would have some sequel to that. But some people have used the argument that her visions were caused by epilepsy seizures, caused by her accident, to discredit her gift. I think the best answer to this is to look at the whole length of her ministry, at everything she has accomplished, all the books she has written, all the letters she has written, and all the counsel she has given to church and to people. And I wonder if that is all caused by epilepsy seizures. That's my answer to that. I'm skeptical of the validity of this question. That will bring it to a close for today. I'll see you next week on Wednesday.